His area became a Roman province and was governed by Roman procurators. From AD 26 to 36, the procurator of Judea was a Roman named Pontius Pilate. In conclusion, a word must be said about the rise of the synagogue, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and Sadducees, and about the Jewish dispersion in the ancient world. Synagogue and Sanhedrin. Before the Jewish exile in 586 BC, the center of Jewish worship was the temple in Jerusalem. After the exile, the center of Jewish worship was the synagogue found in every local community of Jews. It had existed in Palestine before the exile. In Babylonia, the Jews, deprived of the temple, emphasized the synagogue for purposes of prayer, the reading of the scriptures, and teaching, more than they had done in the homeland. It was further developed and strengthened by Ezra and his successors as a means of teaching the law. The book of Acts indicates that where there were Jews in the empire, there was a synagogue also. It was from the synagogue that Paul began his witness in any city he visited. The leader or president of the assembly was called the ruler of the synagogue. He was assisted by a reader of the scriptures, a leader in congregational prayer, and an officer who had custody of the scriptures and presided in the absence of the ruler. The governing body of the Jews in Palestine was the Sanhedrin. Literally, the word Sanhedrin means to sit together. Although it was under Roman authority, it governed the province in both civil and religious matters. In matters that were solely religious, the Jews outside Palestine recognized its authority. The Sanhedrin was composed largely of the Sadducees and Pharisees under the leadership of the high priest. Number 4. Pharisees and Sadducees. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were the Jewish leaders from the time of the Maccabees onward. The Sadducees came from priestly families and were lawyers. They favored old ways and were opposed to change. Nevertheless, they supported efforts of the later Maccabees to introduce Greek ideas into Jewish life. In religion, they are chiefly known as denying the doctrine of the resurrection and the existence of angels and spirits. They also believed that the soul perished with the body. Thus, there was for them no future life. In nearly all respects, the Pharisees opposed the Sadducees. They were not a priestly class, but were laymen. They too were lawyers, but they believed that the law should be open to new interpretations. The Pharisees were ardent nationalists and therefore opposed foreign influences, whether Greek or Roman. They believed in the resurrection and in a future life with rewards and punishments. They were chiefly concerned with the outward observance of the law, in which spiritual attitudes played little part. It was especially this aspect of the religion that brought them into conflict with Jesus. The Sadducees had wrong doctrines. The Pharisees had right doctrines, but their lives contradicted their teachings. Therefore Jesus could say, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So practice and observe whatever they tell you, but not what they do, for they preach, but do not practice." Matthew chapter 23, verses 2 and 3. The Sadducees lost influence and gradually disappeared after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. The Pharisees carried on for a time, but they too disappeared from the scene with the destruction of the Jewish state. Number 5. The dispersion. So far, our consideration of Judaism has been limited to Palestine. It is important to note, however, that there were many more Jews outside Palestine than there were in it. Deportations of prisoners of war, but especially the interest of commerce, spread Jews in all directions from Palestine. It is estimated that during the time of the early Roman Empire, there were about 2.5 million Jews in Palestine. There were 1 million in each of the areas of Egypt, Asia Minor, and Mesopotamia, in addition to about 100,000 in Italy, North Africa. Smaller colonies were scattered throughout the empire. The New Testament reference to the dispersion is impressive. John 7:35, Acts 2:5-11, with many other references throughout the book of Acts, James 1:1, 1 Peter 1:1. Inseparable from the dispersion was a synagogue. Together they established a natural base outside Palestine for the missionary proclamation of the gospel. The most important center of the dispersion was Alexandria, Egypt. There the Jews occupied whole quarters of the city. There the Old Testament was translated into the Greek language in 250 BC. thus making it available to the Greek-speaking world. It became known as the Septuagint. There also, Jewish intellectual life found its greatest spokesman in the famous Jewish philosopher Philo, about 20 BC to AD 42, to whom we shall return in the next section. Greek thought. Within the empire, the most important spiritual influence came not from the Romans, but from the Greeks. Roman power and Roman law controlled the military, political, and social and economic life of the empire. Greek thinking controlled the minds of men. Number 1. Early Greek philosophers. Beginning about 600 BC, Greek philosophers thought profoundly about the nature of the world and the meaning of life. Thales was the first of the philosophers. He lived in the city of Miletus on the southwest coast of Asia Minor. He believed that all that existed arose in one way or another from water. Anaximander, a disciple of Thales, taught that not water but the boundless atmosphere was the source of everything. The philosophy of Heraclitus, who lived in about 500 BC in Ephesus, also in Asia Minor, was more complex. The basic element of the universe, he said, is fire. Out of it all things arise, and to it all things return. Out of fire comes air, out of air water, out of water earth. Then earth returns to water, water to air, air to fire, and thus the endless cycle of change goes on and on. The combinations made possible by these changes cause the great variety of things that are found in the world, but none of them abides. There is nothing constant in life, nothing that is permanent. Life is like a flowing river. One can never step into the same water twice. Indeed, Heraclitus made the river a picture of his philosophy, which he summed up with the words, "All things flow." Nevertheless, the constantly changing world is controlled by a mind, a reason, which he called the Logos. This word should be carefully noted, for it played a very large role in the theological thinking of the early Church. Thales, Anaximander, and Heraclitus all lived in Asia Minor, which had been colonized by Greeks. A similar Greek colony in southern Italy also produced philosophers. One of its leading figures was Parmenides. Living at the same time as Heraclitus, he taught the very opposite of the Ephesian philosopher. He believed that there is no change at all. There is only one thing that exists, being itself. All the change that we experience and observe is appearance only. The variety, the beauty, the sadness, and the joy of life are appearances that exist solely in our minds. Strange as these views may seem, they presented a fundamental problem with which all serious thought about life must struggle. They raised the question, how are permanence and change, reality and appearance, eternity and time related to each other? How is the mature man related to the child out of which he grew? Change has made the child become a man, but permanence has kept the person the same. How is this to be understood? Number 2. Socrates and Plato. With Socrates, who lived in Athens about 450 BC, a change took place in Greek thinking. He was more interested in the quality of men than in the nature of the world. Socrates taught that we can know only one thing with certainty, man himself. We can know what we taught to be and what the purpose of life is. To know this is to have true knowledge. This knowledge can be gained by proper education. Man has the power to make himself morally good. There now appeared in Greece two of the most distinguished philosophers of all time. They were Plato, about 425 to 345 BC, a disciple of Socrates, and Aristotle, about 385 to 320 BC, a disciple of Plato. The center of philosophical thinking had by this time shifted from the colonies to the motherland, specifically to Athens. When Rome was not yet fully master of Italy, when Palestine was still under Persian control, Athens was the brilliant cultural center of the world. Plato united in one philosophy the concern of the earlier thinkers to understand the world as a whole, and the concern of Socrates to understand man. With Parmenides, he believed that the real world was not the world that could be seen and felt. Mountains, trees, sky, river, fields, men. The real world was the unseen world, the world of the ideas. By ideas, Plato did not mean thoughts or opinions, or what we refer to as ideas. He meant spiritual realities that exist in an unseen world. In that world are the ideas of material things like tree, mountain, water, chair, and of spiritual qualities like courage, love, truth, goodness, and, not least, of the soul. These ideas exist in the unseen world in the order of the service to one another. At the very top of the pyramid is the idea of the good. But there is also another world, the world of matter. In its original state, matter is without form or shape. It is a disordered, unharmonious, formless mass, a chaos. However, we never see matter in that shapeless, formless way. The ideas stamp it with their character of order and meaning.